你孤片太平花那inflation 的怒喊，我地方要冷到高喊，晒过路不得不一挂落木别色高木，一用身体擦色高木，West 反正转反恼怒。
Day and welcome to Independent Guåhan's General Assembly. Guahusi Victoria Lola Leon Guerrero, and I will be the MC for today's wonderful panel. Before we begin, we like to start all of our General Assemblies with the Inafresi. So if you don't mind just joining in at home as we do the Inafresi. Inafresi. Ginanimastakilo gihinasoku, imastakalum gikorasonhu, zanimasfigo naninasinyahu, hu fresin maisazu, parabai hu protehi, zan hu defendi, ihinengi, I cultura, I lenguaje, I airi, I hanam, zanitanu tamoru. Ni iren shaku riretsu ginanazu ustata, esti hu afitma, gihilu I biblia, Zani Banderahu, Ibanderan Guåhan. Saina Maasi for joining us. Today we have a really wonderful and lively conversation that we are excited to share with you. But before we get into our conversation, we're going to talk a little bit about who we are as Independent Guåhan and what brings us together today. So we'll start with our welcoming remarks, and then we will have a wonderful presentation by our Maga'taotao Dr. Patricia LG Taimanglo. And then we'll go into our panel who will discuss intergenerational dreams, worldviews, and trauma, how colonization alters self-perception, cultural roles, and respect for elders. And so before we get into that, I wanted to share with you a little bit about what Independent Guåhan stands for. Independent Guåhan is the larger group that supports the efforts of the Independence Task Force, which is part of the Commission on Decolonization. Our main goal is to educate our community about the possibilities of independence. Our mission is to empower the Chamorro people to reclaim our sovereignty as a nation. Inspired by the strength of our ancestors and with love for future generations, we educate and unify all who call our island home to build a sustainable and prosperous independent future. Independent Guåhan has done this in a number of ways. Every month we hold general assemblies like this one that you're participating in today. And we also have other media programming. And so our media committee has been recently taking over the airwaves of Hit Radio 100. And so last Saturday, we had a wonderful basic Independence 101 Q&A with our co-chair, Dr. Michael Lujan Babakwa. And this coming Saturday on Halloween, we'll be live on Hit Radio 100 at 4 p.m. To learn about a new project called Tutdung Marianas, which is collecting the stories of our archipelago. And so please tune in on Hit Radio 100 on the airwaves this Saturday at 4 p.m. Independence also hosts an annual concert. And this year, because of the pandemic and everybody staying home, we decided to air our concert on TV. And so we aired our live concert on KUAM, but now you can find it on KUAM News's YouTube channel. If you look under the playlist, I have it circled here, the Natlatlat Songs of Freedom concert, where we featured a bunch of amazing musicians, and we shared some really inspirational quotes of heroes throughout our history. And so please look for that on YouTube if you can. Finally, our next General Assembly will take place on Thursday, December 3rd. Considering that Thanksgiving Day falls on the last Thursday of the month when we normally hold our General Assemblies, we've pushed it back just 1 week to Thursday, December 3rd. So before we get into our presentation today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the purpose of our General Assembly. So once a month, we hold these General Assemblies. We used to hold them at Chamorro Village, and we would invite the community to come and talk about a different topic of importance, whether it was related to our political status or something that was current in our community. And we always begin each General Assembly by honoring our Maga'taotao, or our heroes, people who within the topic that we were discussing have really done amazing things that enlighten us or inspire us to want to decolonize. And so recently with everything changing with COVID, we decided to move our General Assemblies online. And this year, we really wanted to feature people in our community that are already taking decolonized actions within their fields. And we wanted to really, you know, a lot of times when we talk about independence, people will often say, how can we be independent? We can't even do things right now. And we completely disagree with that. We think there's a lot of amazing Chamorro brilliance in our community to learn from. There's a lot of incredible minds and incredible actions already taking place that if we were independent would only flourish. And so we wanted this month to really tap directly into something that's happening that we felt needed to be addressed. And so our community is going through a lot of tragedy at the moment because of COVID. COVID-19 has taken the lives of 76 people in our community. Every single one of these people come from families who are all impacted, come from workplaces, come from circles of friends. Their lives really do impact many people, especially those who are our menamku or our elders. Losing an elder in our community means losing the stories, the wisdom, the role that they play in our families. And so myself and Dr. Francine Napati, who's the co-chairperson for Educational Development and Research at Independence, we felt that we really wanted to hear from some of our experts in our community about why people have not felt the impacts, that we've seen a lot of really ignorant comments, for example, online about how the people who are dying would have died anyways, which is very hurtful and insensitive and very culturally inappropriate. But also we've seen a lot of disrespect shown towards our leaders who are also our elders in the decisions that they're making, in addressing them in their first name and taunting them and making fun of them, or even comments that, you know, someone is too old to be a leader. And so in response to that, we really wanted to take a look at, well, what's happening intergenerationally? Why is this rhetoric occurring in our community? And so we want to welcome first Dr.Lilli Perez, who is part of our panel. We assembled our panel and we turned to them as experts in our community to say, who is someone that, you know, does this work that we would really want to honor as a Maga'taotao? And so I'm going to introduce Dr. Lilli first, and then she will introduce our Maga'taotao, who's going to really speak to this issue. So Dr. Lilli has nearly 30 years of experience as a behavioral health provider in both the private and public sectors, and is currently a behavioral health provider at IHP Medical Group. She holds several professional licenses, such as a licensed professional counselor, a marriage and family therapist, a mental health counselor, and a licensed clinical social worker. Dr. Lilli obtained her doctorate in 1998 from the Graduate School of Social Work and Social Research at Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania, her graduate degree in Human Relations from the University in Oklahoma, and her undergraduate degree in social work from the University of Guam. Dr. Lilli, a Guam native, is a published scholar whose work reflects her knowledge of Micronesian ethnic diversity, indigenous helping practices, and support systems. So Dr. Lilli had nominated our Maga'taotao, and so we thought it was very appropriate for her to introduce her. Hafiday, and welcome, Dr. Lilli.
Thank you very much, Lola. Thank you for having me. I am very pleased to introduce to you Dr. Patricia LG Taimanglo, more fondly known as Patty. She is the daughter of the late Vicente and Vicenta Taimanglo. Dr. Taimanglo is a Chamorro. She is from Guam. She's a licensed psychologist on both Guam and Hawaii. Her bachelor's degree is from the University of Guam. She has a master's degree from UH Manoa and a doctorate degree from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Back in our day, because we're from a different generation, we had to leave to get our degrees. Now you can do them online. So keep in mind, when she obtained her last 2 degrees, she had to move off island. So she was away for about 12 years before coming home in 2002. She's also presented not just at local conferences, but national conferences. And she's included such topics as homelessness on youth and families. She's talked about multicultural counseling, also working with diverse populations. She's done much work on trauma and intergenerational transmission of historic community trauma. I also wanted to share that in the earlier part of her life, she talked about before she got into clinical practice, she was a teacher for over 12 years and she loved doing so. She was in Hawaii teaching, also Massachusetts and Washington State, where she worked as a school counselor and also as a school psychologist. She's worked in outpatient private companies as well, providing intensive in-home services to address complex mental health issues, child maltreatment, and also some substance abuse concerns. More recently, she retired from the Department of Corrections after working there for 5.5 years. And so she's really proud to have been part of that multidisciplinary team working at corrections and also providing quality mental health services for those people of our community who are confined. So I wanted to state that while she was there, she was working with those who had serious mental illness, some adjustment concerns, and also a specialized area of mental health called correctional mental health care. She, prior to that, had worked also at Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center for 2 years. She was in private practice for over 10 years, and she also served as an adjunct professor at the University of Guam. So this month marks the next phase in her life. Looking at retirement and what she's going to be doing with the rest of her life. I can't imagine that you would be staying at home. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I really appreciate about you, is that I remember when you turned 50, you threw a party. It was a celebration. And that made a lasting impact on me, because I think a lot of times when we think about our elderly, it's like, some sort of quiet retreat, and then you sort of fizzle out into the horizon. But you celebrated aging. And I think that more people need to do that. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Patricia Taimanglo.
Thank you.
Yay.
Thank you. That 50th birthday was really to honor my siblings and their spouses, because they had, while I was going off island, going to school and working, they had taken care of my parents. And so it was really to honor them and to thank them and to celebrate kind of a new stage in life. So I guess it's my turn to talk. I wrote the quote and I want to I shaped my presentation around it. I said that my quote says, "It is time to stop saying and doing things that make us appear or feel inferior, because we are not inferior. We are most capable people who should demand respect. In order to demand respect from others, we must first have self-respect and respect for our values and our beliefs. It is my position that we are a most educated and capable people, capable of governing ourselves, able to embrace and perpetuate our language, culture, music, dance, art forms, and spiritual beliefs. We must do so with what I call grace. Grace. meaning not losing ourselves and our self-respect or identifying with the oppressor in the process. The questions and examinations of our sovereignty as a people, the acquiescence of power to the United States of America, a true colonial power, and the pathway to independence are complicated but timely in this period of our history of Guåhan. I would encourage those who wish to understand how we got here to maintain an open mind, read and learn about our history, check out the independent Zooms, all of the things that are out there. Learn as much as you can each day. There's so much information available daily about how and who we are and how we allow others to treat us. In therapy, I often highlight to my patients that we are treated the way we allow others to treat us. We actually teach people how to treat us. For example, in a new relationship, one needs to continually teach the other that they have value, that they have worth and power, that negative and disparaging remarks or outright abuse would not be tolerated. When we do nothing, say nothing, it is a surrender of power that leads to abuse, neglect, learned helplessness, and self-hatred. A little bit about learned helplessness, meaning a condition in which a person suffers from powerlessness arising from a traumatic event or a series of events, failure to succeed into developing a maladaptive response. It becomes maladaptive over time, but at one time had been adaptive or had purpose. It may have been adaptive. For example, a World War II survivor, when questioned about what he or she did when witnessing an atrocity, the response was, we could not show any response. We could do nothing. Even though their hearts were breaking and they were experiencing extreme fear. Imagine a generation just before I was born, 3.5 years of not knowing, not showing emotions, but surviving. The other concept I talked about was self-hatred. Self-hatred comes from repeated messages by those who are closest to us, including our colonizers, who tell us repeatedly, in their words and actions, who we are and what we mean to them. Make no mistake, the interest the United States has for Guam is our beautiful island. In 1995, Duran and Duran, Native American psychologists, coined the term the soul wound, and the soul wound came up in previous Zooms, educational Zooms on this site. So soul wound is the core of much of the suffering of Native Americans and of indigenous people who have undergone centuries of colonization and oppression. They believe that the identification with this oppressor protected them and had an adverse effect on the self-worth of the individual, hence the collective, the group. As a people throughout our history, we had suffered atrocities and oppression brought on by colonial powers. We need to strive not to be like our colonizers to ourselves by being critical of one another, harsh, neglectful, demeaning, or rejecting of one another. It is not uncommon to hear, na nala matapeng, oh, that's not Chamorro, that's Polynesian, or who does she think she is, and so forth. Very negative comments. Or for someone to challenge someone else's Chamorro-ness. As an example of the, my daughter had gone to an event at the Guam Club in San Diego, and she was confronted by someone who asked her what she was doing at this Chamorro event. And she looked at them and she said, I'm Taimanglo. You know, but what I'm saying is that is not our cultural practice to come up to someone who who may appear a little different and challenge them. And yet that was what she experienced. I know this saying that culture and language are not stagnant. It's fluid. And the most true is that it changes over time. But we must strive to be better each day and be better to one another. 22 years ago, I completed my dissertation entitled An Exploratory Study of Community Trauma and Culturally Responsive Counseling with Chamorro Clients. The participants were all mental health practitioners who had provided treatment to Chamorro clients. They were from different disciplines and different ethnic groups, but they agreed that Guam had experienced historic and repeated traumas, and that included the adverse effects of our current political system, and that we were continuing to be a culture in transition. Completing that dissertation was the most liberating, but the most painful journey, personally and professionally. Confronting the realities of life, our choices, and becoming fully self-aware, to include freeing oneself of the notion that we are free and equal. We live in a society, in a government, that repeats that and espouses that, but in practice, they're lacking. That we are self-governing, and that the United States and its people have our best interest at heart. So throughout that whole process, being challenging those thoughts. But as we move forward on this path of decolonization, of claiming our own right to a sovereign nation, the path of cultural self-awareness and developing our vision for the future, I encourage all to embrace a collectivist view, worldview. Such a worldview is essential as it focuses on a group's goal and what is best for the collective group versus that of an individualistic worldview, which is competitive and motivated by an individual or a few individuals' desire for personal reward or gain. Becoming independent individually starts with, of course, one person, meaning making decisions that are defensible and not merely going along with the group and not understanding why I agree with them. Gone should be the day when one votes in an election on how a parent votes, or that someone from their village, or, oh, he's my cousin, or just because, nay. One should know why. It is equally important that as a community, an independent island nation of Guam involves clarity of who we are as a people, avoiding the competitive fight to be at the top, but by bolstering and supporting and holding up others who represent us. We need to be clear of who we are, our identity, our collective vision, and how important it is to bring others along with us, along this path that we choose. Our acceptance of ourselves and the inclusion of others will more likely lead to our success in achieving our vision. It is essential to not only maintain self-respect, respect for our culture, and work to end all acts of oppression, to include the oppression of the Chamorro people and the oppression of others. Okay, I kind of said a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we will definitely be hearing a lot more of your powerful thoughts during the question and answer portion. So that said, if you're tuning in and if you have any questions for Dr. Pat or our panel, please feel free to just type them into the comment section and we'll try our very best to get to them. But I will say I was very much enjoying what you were sharing, and I look forward to hearing more of your thoughts, Dr. Pat. I think even just encouraging our community to really think about where do these thoughts come from is very powerful. And so as we unpack this topic a little bit more of intergenerational trauma, I think that'll force all of us to begin to even take a closer look at our own internal dialogue, right? And what feeds that. So thank you for bringing that up for me. And so I'd like to welcome back Dr. Lilli, who's going to open us up with a presentation to share some of her research. And would you like to say a few words, and then would you like me to start the share screen, or you want to just cue me when it's time?
if you could just show that particular slide with Thompson.
Sure, I'll start the share now. Okay, there we go. And then here we go. And play. All right.
So I wanted to share that one of the things that I was struggling with when I was looking to do my dissertation was, what does it mean to be a Chamorro? And I wanted to write about social support systems. So I decided to look at the work of Dr. Thompson. I mean, she was the one who first wrote about some of the social dynamics with regard to the militarization of the Chamorro people. So I was really pleased that I had a chance to meet with her before she passed away. And so that's a picture of Dr. Thompson and myself. She was in Hawaii in a long-term care facility, and she was being cared for by her grandniece, who had no idea of the work that she had done here on the island. So Dr. Thompson died. She was not married and she didn't have any children. But I can tell you, when I was looking at my own research, I knew I wanted to work on reciprocity, as I shared, and there was another Chamorro there. So of course it makes it easier when you feel like you're not alone. I went to Pennsylvania, and Rick Castro was there too. He was working on his doctorate, actually his master's in fine arts. So we had agreed when we were done that he was going to work on the cover of my book, which is for my dissertation. That's the next slide. And in this book is the picture of myself with Dr. Thompson. So part of this journey for me was, at the time, I was living on the East Coast, and our late Governor Ricky Berdalio had committed suicide. And I remember my classmates saying, "Oh, your governor committed suicide." It made news in the New York Times. And I was, I found myself like always having to explain, it's not like he was majorly depressed and he wanted to die. It was because of what was happening. And I found myself explaining about reciprocity. And so I decided to write about reciprocity in the context of social support systems. And I looked at how we trace them over time. I tied it to life cycle events like birth, marriage, and death. And I guess I wanted to highlight one particular piece of the book, and it's towards the end, when I talked about how we can apply reciprocity on a more regional level. And I talked about our brothers and sisters in Micronesia. And I said, if we could get ourselves organized as Micronesians, we would be an awesome force. And I still think that. So when I was doing my research, I was looking for information specific to Micronesians. There was information out there on social organizations with Polynesians, Hawaiians specifically, but not anything for Micronesians. And so I decided to undertake that after I finished my dissertation. So that's the next slide. And one of the things that Rick Castro and I worked on is the storyboard of Micronesian peoples. And then we subtitled it A Navigation Chart to Better Understanding. And so it was put out, it's almost like 20 years, 10 years apart, 2 different publications. But, we also consulted with some of the professors over at Mark to help us with this, because it looked like a periodic table. So Don Rubenstein said, Lily, no one's going to read it if it looks like that. So we changed it up, and we tried to make it a little bit more appealing to the eye, and we included elements from each of the different Micronesian ethnic groups. And the backside of the poster actually has that highlighted. And, I figured if people are going to want to learn about us, they should learn about Micronesians from a Micronesian and not from someone outside of Micronesia. So, this whole piece about who we are, I think, just discovering our face and writing about the details in our face, it really should come from us. in my work over time, I started to shift my emphasis in working with adults to working with children and families, and including play. And so, the next slide. The other tool that was developed is another poster called Wellness in Micronesian Families. And they were born of what we called cultural conversations. We got people together from various Micronesian ethnic groups to talk about some of these topics. And so it came to be that we looked at health, wellness, and social status, which most people may or may not consider together. We also looked at mind, body, emotion, and spirit. And then we looked at public and private practices, or these perspectives. There was a second tool born of this, and that is the next slide. And that is called the spirit of the Micronesian family. So the spirit of the Micronesian family now shifts a little bit, and we're looking at things like how we define family, because we're not just talking about the biological connections, right? We're talking about the people who live in our home, who feed us, who care for us. We're looking at notions of parenting and nurturing, and then play. And play is different, not in the sense of like wasting time or even looking at it as recreation, but looking at play as an activity that reinforces family relationships. So that's a very different way of viewing play, and looking at it in the context of family. I mean, that's where that whole intergenerational intervention is going to happen. And so I wanted to share those three particular posters as part of our cultural conversations, and wanted to share a particular quote. And the quote is, "Through these cultural conversations, we learn that we can begin to destigmatize behavioral health in our ethnic communities by focusing on Indigenous concepts and promoting appropriate cultural practices." So looking at it again from the inside out instead of from an outsider's perspective of what's going on inside. And next slide. I also wanted to share that, I was a part of a group of people who had put together this resource, and it's a behavioral health and disabilities glossary in Chamorro. That's one of the parts. The second part includes contents of the three posters that I shared with you. And the third part of this publication talks about traditional medicine and wellness. And that was put together by Dr. Patricia Lizama and Zita Pangilinan. Again, local resources and looking at healing through traditional practices. And why am I emphasizing some of these tools? Because I remember thinking that if in the future, if we don't commit this to writing, somebody from within committed to writing, it will cease to exist. And so in the future, I challenge the future generations to continue this practice, to continue to document these practices and the terms from which we use them as they apply to our lives and to our families, and to capture some of the concepts, because they don't necessarily dovetail very well with some of the Western concepts. So I did want to share that, in terms of my own research and what that means to me. And so, okay, no more slides. So if you're thinking about, how to contribute your ideas, yes, there are different platforms from which to share them, but and I encourage you to explore those platforms so that we can get an insider's perspective out there to the others. Just want to thank you for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thanks for sharing these resources. I'm definitely going to connect with you later about how to help make those more accessible to the broader community. They're so great. Thank you. I'd like to welcome our last panelist, Dr. Sharleen Santos-Bamba. Dr. Sharleen Santos-Bamba is an Associate Dean at the University of Guam, an Associate Professor of English, Chamorro Studies, and Micronesian Studies, and is the first Administrator of Chamorro Descent in the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. Viva! Her combined 22 years of experience in secondary and higher education, assessment, and evaluation have positioned her to take on various roles and tasks related to student learning and achievement. Sharleen's publications that have contributed to Chamorro discourse on language and literacy, roles of women and culture. As an educational consultant, she has been contracted to provide training in literacy and culturally sustainable education for the Guam Department of Education, the FSM school system, and ETS. She is an advocate of the production of Indigenous Chamorro literature and art and engages in initiatives that promote language, literacy, and Chamorro ways of knowing. She is married to the very lucky Vincent Bamba, and they reside in Pagu Bay. Hafiday and welcome, Dr. Shar.
Hafiday, thank you. I still have to get used to people reading and speaking about me. Thank you, Lola. Sidus Maasi. Hafiday and Sidus Maasi for inviting me to participate in this gathering and to share the space with you and these wonderful women, Drs. Lilli and Pat. My paternal family is originally from the village of Pidi, specifically the Tanza Vista area. My grandfather, Francisco Cruz Santos, was from Maga'taotao, and my grandmother, Maria San Nicolas Kenga Santos, from Pidi. My maternal grandparents, Manuel Concepcion Quintaniza and Ana Babauta Taitagui Quintaniza, lived in Agate. My grandfather grew up in Sumay. My parents, Jose Kenga Santos and Annie Quintaniza Santos, made the choice to make their home here in Pagu Bay. I offer a bit of my family history to illuminate the significance of intergenerational connections and how our connections to family, the land, and shared experiences shape our perceptions and worldviews. I did not get to know my paternal grandmother, and my maternal grandfather passed away when I was 5. So I had my grandpa Petey, as we endearingly referred to him, and my grandma Agate. Grandpa was a small-time entrepreneur. He started a taxi service for military servicemen who often needed a ride uptown. He bought and sold carabao, pigs, and other animals from his lansu. Grandma was a mother of 16 and worked at the Agate Junior High School as a cook in the cafeteria. She later retired and took on the role of caring for some of her children's children while her daughters went to work. I was one who was watched by Grandma and was able to have her in my life until I was about 26 years old. I was fortunate to have her for that long, and even more fortunate to have had the influence of my mother and my mother's sisters as well, all 5 of them. Intergenerational relationships put us in spaces where we hear different kinds of conversations, even some of the ones that aren't meant for children to hear. We learn to cook, build a chicken coop, hunt for a suli, whatever it may be. We learn the values in the home. Whatever these experiences are and the conversations we hear, they are internalized. And over time, we learn to accept some of them and reject others. When we entered school, we learned to separate the personal and social experiences and knowledge and work hard to meet the expectations set forth by our teachers and school system. For most, at least when I was growing up and when my parents were in school, We learn to compartmentalize and to appropriate certain behaviors and actions that didn't always seem to fit, or at least led us to wonder later in life why that happened. A gross oversimplification is learning about the importance of the quote unquote founding fathers, in contrast to learning about ancient leaders or governors of Guam. For myself, this epiphany did not hit me until I was in my late 20s. I recall it vividly. I was sitting in a classroom in Pennsylvania in PhD school, and the seminar discussion was about how to reach minorities and immigrant children. So I thought to myself, immigrant children and minorities. I wasn't an immigrant and I wasn't a minority in my island. Or was I? I realized that day that I was a minority in the bigger picture, in the landscape of academia. A few years later, I was at a conference and I was invited to attend a caucus for women of color. Again, I was thrown aback. What does that even mean, right? I was never referred to before that day as a woman of color. I didn't know I was a woman of color. I just thought of myself as a woman. Now, the realization hit me hard a second time. Why all the labels and categories? It's because it's a way for others to deal with me and what I represent to them. You see, my parents and grandparents never told me that I may struggle with identity or a sense of place or a sense of belonging. We just always belonged. So as a result of all this, when I entered the classroom, right, I structured my lectures and lessons to include moments of discomfort. I wanted my freshmen and sophomores to be uncomfortable with topics. I wanted them to experience the struggle and the challenge of thinking things through. What do they really mean? So on the first day of class, for many years, I'd ask, why do literary anthologies that UOG orders, why are they all by DWM? DWM. Blank faces. Some open the book to look for the author, DWM. After a minute or two, I'd ask, do you know work by DWM? Of course, none of them did. Then I'd say, what? We all know multiple works by DWM. Dead white males. The look on their faces, priceless. Then they'd laugh and agree. This was my way of decolonizing the classroom space and reaching into my bag of memories and experiences to evoke critical thought and processes so that my students were able to question what they were learning in school during their formative years, what they were learning in my classroom, and to assure them that it was okay to utilize and apply tomorrow ways of knowing to make sense of the world and the people we come in contact with. As an administrator, I don't have the same direct contact with students that I had. So I had to think of a way to continue with my pledge to incorporate the knowledge and culture of the host community and avoid tokenism. And we don't want to be a token culture or have a token language. And so by supporting and endorsing research and inquiry specific to Guam and the region, right, was just one way. The second way that I incorporated into my place of work was through the establishment of an initiative that I called Inakusetsa. Inakusetsa. It's about bringing the culture and knowledge and people of the community to the university, sharing it and sending it back out with students to harvest, to share, and to nourish. Now, I don't have a clear answer as to how we can decolonize an institution of education. What I do know is that the knowledge and experiences gained from intergenerational relationships, exchanges, and a Chamorro worldview are integral to challenging and questioning Western or outside notions of what's valuable and desirable. And it's still a challenge today, right? I hear what Dr. Lilli experienced. I hear what Dr. Pat experienced. And my experience in many ways continues to mirror that. And I know that there are other young Chamorros who still experience this. And so by these little steps, I think, whether you're a teacher or a parent or someone in the community or an advocate, right? Reassuring and engaging with this type of discourse is significant and can make huge steps, take huge steps to helping young people and even older people. I was in my late 20s, right? Realize this. And I think that by having women like Dr. Lilli and Dr. Pat, and having individuals like Lola and Maga'taotao and Dr. Fran embrace these concepts and share it, that's what we're doing right now. And I think that spreading this knowledge and the significance of intergenerational knowledge and experiences and challenges will definitely help us to break down, right, the colonial walls and the colonial mindset so that we can truly decolonize how we view or how many people view who we are and the world. So thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Diva Sizos and Saina Maasi for that wonderful presentation. You definitely as well got me thinking again, as Dr. Pat had, about, well, what are these things that we say and these thoughts that we have? What are they originating? Where do they originate from, right? How much do we think through the things that we're saying, and how much do they really reflect who we are as a people? And so I won't take up any more time with my thoughts because we have gotten an overwhelming response already from our viewers online. And so now we're going to just quickly transition into our question and answer portion. Again, if you have any questions, just type them into the Facebook comments, and we will do our best to get to all of them. For this portion, I will be joined by Dr. Francine Napati, who is my co-chair, and we'll just take turns asking questions. So I'll go ahead and get us started. The first question is actually a combination of two questions that came in that I felt were both related. Basically, in this notion of, instead of only looking to the United States for models or answers, both of these questions really point to how much have we looked to our sisters and brothers in the Pacific. And so one says, is there something we can learn from our brothers and sisters who are as heavily colonized about how to deal with trauma and be more confident in ourselves? Or is this something that other islanders can't understand? I watched a webinar on dance last week, and it seems like other Pacific peoples dismiss us because we were colonized and don't take our trauma seriously. The other person says, my mind was so opened when I first read Apelihaofa's Sea of Islands and the idea that the ocean doesn't divide but connects. How can we communicate this to others, though we have internalized so much of these feelings of inferiority? So it seems like both of these questions are rooted in how do we look to the region, and how does the region see us, and kind of how does that then help us address these feelings of inferiority?
You know, can I just jump in? Is this how this works? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
What stands out is meeting with Tahitians and people from that region. And they don't understand how we allow ourselves to be undermined, how we have allowed over the centuries. They described how they got the French to collaborate with them. Was they did not like the nuclear testing in their waters, or the underwater testing in their waters. And so what they did was they just went out and said, everybody, we're going to blockade. And they blockade the entrance to the gates. And they went out and anything that could float was out there blocking the waterway, their port. But they just said, everybody came out. They all just said enough. And so when they think about our history, when they hear about our history, they're just so perplexed that they too had that feeling of just, like, what do we do? Who do we get permission from? But when they did that brought international attention to what had been going on for years, and that they had fought over for years. And so getting people to work together, but saying enough, just as they did. One day they just said, enough. We want this to end, and we want to take our power back. And in doing that, they unified. And truck drivers were out there. They blockaded everything. Nothing could come in or out of Tahiti. And so it's that kind of example that really many of the comments from Polynesia, for example, it come from. It's that we have been so passive. And that's that maladaptive thing I was talking about, that's how we survived over the centuries. But in doing that, we bound our own hands and covered our mouths and became invisible to the colonizer. And they just said, no, we're not going to do that. So that was just my thought. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think for myself, I wanted to just emphasize that it begins at home. And I feel like if we could work within our family context, like bring women to the point where they're appreciated in the families, and children where they're sacred. We see them again as sacred beings and treat them as sacred beings. Then, I think that they would be brought up in a world where they wouldn't expect to be treated otherwise. So, I just want to emphasize that it starts at home, and then also recognizing when our people fall victim to self-medicating, right, to numbing that pain that they've experienced, that intergenerational traumatic pain, we find that they numb it with all kinds of drugs and other kinds of addictive behaviors. And these behaviors, they become sort of corrosive from within, and they erode the family fiber. That context of community starts to, it's like rust away, and I feel like that while we might be able to look at things at a global level or a national level, unless we start at home, the building blocks are not going to be there. The foundation is going to be missing. So that's the piece that I want to share in terms of responding to that question.
It's very important. I also liked what Sharleen was talking about, what she had done in schools, and that was, you know, your work was really decolonizing the mind. Most people have very much difficulty with the idea that they're Chamorro. Oh yeah, I'm Chamorro, but they don't know what it means. And then you have people who, oh no, those are like the natives, you know, and these are Chamorros saying that about other Chamorros. No, I'm Guamanian. And I remember my mom, you know, having these conversations with my parents, but my mom said, Guamanian, I don't know where that came from, but I'm Chamorro. And there was finality. You know, there was this made up word after the war, and it was just like, well, I don't even know why we did that to ourselves. So she refused to accept Guamanian. So the work that you were doing, Sharleen, was really decolonizing the mind of your students and having them question and be curious. And that's the beginning of what you were bringing up, you know, Victoria or Lola, the idea that other people, their identity is so secure. You know, if I'm Fijian, I'm Fijian. I'm Indian Fijian. I'm not this American who has limited rights and can't even vote for the president, to the fact that, you know, so it's all inclusive, but at first it begins with an identity, a family identity, a healthy home environment, but also having teachers and people surrounding the young people to really look at, who am I? You know, why do I do things? Why do I like this? Because in the absence of a secure identity, it's like a vessel or a cup that's empty. And it's begging to be filled. So if it's full, you can't fill it anymore. But what is it full of? And so I love I call it the renaissance of our culture. It's the revival of our language and the joy in singing and music and dance and all of that. That's all about our identity as individuals, but also as a people. And the more that we can do that, celebrate it, and again with kindness and with grace, then the more that the young people growing up can have the power to say, well, I enjoyed this book because X, Y, and Z, versus, oh, well, everybody liked it, so I just got it, you know? So that blind follower is the danger. It's safe, but that's where the power is completely relinquished to the other. And the bowl, the vessel, is filled. So an example is somebody living in the States, Chamorro family, you know, and they're dressing like they're Black kids, or, you know, their clothing and the choice of music, they're Hispanics, and they're more because that vessel was empty. In the home, there was an absence, except for maybe the food. There was an absence of what really being Chamorro meant. And so it had to be filled with something. And so it was. So anyway, I just threw a bunch of concepts out there. I'm sorry. I just get carried away. Did that help?
Yes. Si Zeus Masi to all our panelists. Actually, our next question is: suicides are up on island because of the shelter-in-place orders, and so a lot of people are feeling a lot of stressors about their job and about money. So how can we help people like this, especially because we can't really be around each other at this time, where it's very hard to connect?
If I could jump in, I'm not a clinical psychologist and I'm not a licensed counselor, okay? However, I wanted to thank you, Fran, for asking that. Just today in the college, we hosted a 1 hour, 90-minute webinar for our faculty and students, right? And we brought a Chamorro psychologist, Dr. Angela Ligo. And Dr. Ligo gave a presentation on how to cope, right? And what she did was she tied, you know, our daily practices, right? And how we engage with our family, and the significance of not just our immediate family, but our extended families also, right? Our extended families are a huge part of our lives. And her advice really was about, first, one, stop and take care of yourself, right? Because we can't help others if we can't take care of ourselves. And two, she said, you could still make phone calls, right? You could still do a video chat, right? You can still do these things. I think, but the absence of touch and the absence of the hugging, right, and the loud laughter and the barbecues, right, have really impacted us in a lot of ways. And we've seen an increase, right, in domestic violence, in child abuse, right, and things like that. And so what can we do? I think it's, don't isolate yourself when you're at home, right? Make an appointment for a phone call with your cousin, or make an appointment for a Zoom call or a WhatsApp chat. I think those kind of small things are helpful. And I found her advice to me helpful. And we'll see how it goes.
Great. Thank you so much. Would anyone else like to comment?
That was a very good answer, Sharleen. You know, it's a very complex and society that we live in, incredibly complex. And there were suicides even before COVID, and at the numbers that were incredibly high, coupled with substance use, even just alcohol, but quite a bit of it, really plays havoc on a person's mind, their hearts, and their relationships. And, you know, it's not an answer or solution up to that, but going back to this whole topic is, you know, people are so busy in life, going from here to here to here, all these obligations. But when we're actually asked to face ourselves, hear our own thoughts, because it's so quiet, think about our own, think too much maybe, but being allowed to distract ourselves is helpful, especially if we're not using any substances. You know, reading books, if you are all alone, it's definitely reaching out. But one of the things that I talk to my clients about is that, you know, it gets very dark, you know, but if you can just wait, tomorrow the sun comes out, you know, you want to make it through the night, those dark moments, because the sun will rise. So one of the health solutions are really getting sunlight, getting outside, eating food, of course, getting rest. But sunshine is incredibly important to one's health and mental health. But the answer is very complex. It's very difficult to schedule an appointment with a mental health provider. I know that. To see a psychiatrist, we only have a few. And, you know, if you know of anybody who is suffering, then definitely reach out. That's my encouragement, is if you know that somebody's alone, don't wait for them to call you, call them. If you know that you haven't seen or heard from them in a while, do something. But if you yourself is, you know, you're suffering, then reach deep down and ask yourself what's going on and make it through the night. Just make it through the night. But definitely call people if you have the ability to do that. And if you're using it, stop, you know, because that only makes it worse. So the solution is always complicated. There are a lot of ideas on how to address that on the island. I think Guam Behavioral Health has a whole cadre of people that answer the crisis line. But to suffer alone, sometimes the feeling that somebody cares is enough to help us make it through the night. So just call anybody. Don't call the people that that you felt rejected by, but definitely call even Guam Behavioral Health. They have a crisis line. They have somebody on the phone 24/7. Reach out. But more than that is if you are well and you haven't talked to a friend or someone you know who lives alone, call them. You know, drop a package at the door. It could be just a book, something that says, I care. So anybody else, Lily?
Yeah, I wanted to add, you know, a lot of the times working with young children, I like to encourage parents to maintain like a pretty consistent schedule so that, you know, like the time seems to have kind of like some structure. Lots of adults talk about, you know, sometimes they can't even remember what day it is of the week or what day of the month it is, sometimes what month we're in. So I encourage them, you know, to have a daily schedule, a routine with your children, and depending on the age of your children, to share with them information about the coronavirus. Otherwise, you know, and I don't mean like saturate them with information. I mean really just to kind of share information about what it is, how to keep safe, so that they understand, you know, something that's age appropriate. You know, again, everyone's talked about taking the breaks that you need to, but the need for a routine with children, I can't overemphasize how that would give them some comfort, because it adds stability to their day-to-day living. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Our next question is comes from somebody who's living off island. It says, does the panel feel that there is a fundamental difference in identity between Chamorros in the Marianas and those living in the diaspora? In fact, when Dr. Shar was talking, someone had even commented in, I didn't know I was a diaspora. So I think this is something that's really emerging a lot. So this person says, I feel some of the issues that this panel has discussed, and also in the last General Assembly, but I also feel there may be some differences. What does this panel think? So again, is there a difference between Chamorros living in our home islands and living outside of our home islands?
I think that people are always in transition, regardless of where they live. They're all doing the best they can. Is there a difference? All I know is that when we come to the point where we're looking at decolonizing, we need to look beyond Guam and reach out and educate and share with our fellow Chamorros from Guam, partly because CNMI already has their commonwealth, but reaching out and gaining support from everyone who wishes to participate in the discussion, in the movement to decolonize and to become independent, if that is what the people choose. Is there a difference? I just think people are so busy anywhere they live, but that's just me. Is there a big difference? Depends on what they think of as being Chamorro, you know. Part of it is because it tends to revolve around family, which is powerful, and food, and the social, like the religious events. But I'd like to hear more from other people.
You know, one of the things that I posed a question in my own research. Oftentimes we talk about how the culture down south is richer than the culture up north. You know, and I asked the question, I said, you know, if you have something happening and the same thing is happening around you, does it have more value than if there's an exchange and it's happening in an environment where there isn't always that same kind of practice? Because it really depends on perspective. One could say that if you're engaged in reciprocity and in a smaller group and in the larger context, it's not happening, the value of that reciprocity carries more weight because it takes more effort to engage in that behavior. And so, you know, I put it out there. because it really is a personal question. You're right. Where are you in your journey? I know for myself, I struggle because I'm a light complected Chamorro. I'm a Chamorro po asu, and I know it. I'm a half cooked Chamorro. I don't even like fritada. I can't even handle it when they're killing the pig. I feel so bad for the animal. Like how un-Chamorro is that, you know? But am I Chamorro? I feel Chamorro. I think my grandmother would say I'm Chamorro. So would my dad. So would my siblings. I mean, I would give my last dollar if my siblings needed it. You know, if that was my last dollar in my wallet and my brother or sister needed it, it's done. To me, that's Chamorro. If you can give until you can't give anymore, and even if you have nothing to give, if you have your hands, you can still give. You can still give. So to me, that's Chamorro. Now, for those of you who live elsewhere, what does it mean to you? You know, what does Chamorro mean to you? Because you could wear it on the outside. It can be on the stickers outside your car or on your license plate. You could wear a Guam t-shirt, but unless you have it in your heart and your mind, because you could think Chamorro, but if you don't feel Chamorro, you're not really a full cooked Chamorro. So, you know, I don't know what it means for them, but that's a really good question to ask yourself. And it might be that as you get older, that definition will change. When you have children, when you have grandchildren, when you're taking care of your elderly parents, it changes.
It's a great answer.
That's true. That's very, you know, there are more Chamorros across the United States and around the world than there are on Guam, right? So we're ethnically speaking, right? There are more in the States, but it's definitely a mindset, right? And whoever makes it contentious, I think that's a struggle that the individual has to deal with. And maybe the differences that some people see are, you know, here on Guam, we can get together a little bit more often because we're closer together, right? Does that make us more Chamorro? Or because one lives in the Bay Area, right, and the other lives in SoCal, and they can't get together very often, does that make them less Chamorro? And the answer is no, but I think most definitely is Chamorro-ness, right, is revolves around our epistemology and our worldview, right, and the traditions and the values that we have. And I think that's key. And if an individual is able to identify what that is and share it with others, then who am I to say that that's Chamorro in the diaspora, right? It's not really Chamorro. And I think that's a very unfair and judgmental kind of mentality. And, you know, in this day and age, we can be whatever we want to be.
We don't need other people to identify who we are. Like Dr. Lilli, you know, if you're Chamorro, you claim it. There are many people who are not biologically Chamorro, but you wouldn't be able to tell because their values, beliefs, they speak the language, they love the music, and sometimes they're even more Chamorro than the ones who have, you know, generations. They're from centuries here on Guam. So one's identity is really self-identified, and one of the reasons why I mentioned that it was important to reach out to and educate others living all over the United States is because there was a model in Palau. When Palau, and this is not my area of expertise, when Palau was going through their decolonization and their vote for what kind of government they wanted, they didn't do it in isolation. They reached out to all the different, I mean, they went out and went to different communities and they talked about what it would mean to the islands and the people and got them involved in the discussion, and then they participated in the vote. At least that's my understanding. And I thought that was very powerful because it was a way to connect everybody to decisions that were going to be very important.
Thank you, everyone. This is actually a great question to go into next, because as we were exploring issues and identity, and I love that's actually where we're going, the next question has to do with Inafat Malik. So a lot of the time we'll find ourselves in spaces where people don't necessarily understand the principles of Inafat Malik. And so somebody asks, sometimes when I hear people use Inafat Malik, it sounds like civility discourse, like a way of keeping people quiet. I remember in a lecture Dr. Bavakwa had saying that Inafat Malik shouldn't be used to silence people if they have important things to say. Where can we kind of fit this into the discussion? And I think maybe even how do we navigate that? How do we navigate between practicing Inafat Malik without appearing rude, but also being able to voice your concerns and your opinions?
I think in the context of family, it would be to have time for each person to share their perspective. Sometimes children don't feel as comfortable sharing their thoughts with adults, but if we raise them to honor their feelings and to appreciate their voice, then they would do so, right? Because I'm just mindful of sort of the intergenerational evolution of some of these values and practices, and that it's a continuing process, and I hope it will continue even beyond my death. But I think that would be one of the places to start with the younger ones, so that if there are concerns they have, that they can share those concerns, and it's not presented as if they were being disrespectful to elders, but really just wanting to share thoughts and ideas, and maybe for the elders to respond by supporting the sharing, not necessarily the idea, but the idea of sharing the thoughts.
This
oftentimes kind of like we tell kids to be quiet.
Yeah. It kind of goes back, Dr. Lilli, to what Dr. Pat said earlier, right? Like, gone are the days of just voting for who your parents voted for, right? and similarly, right? Similarly, I think now there was a time, I remember growing up when there was a time when we should have just kept quiet, right? And
Yes.
not talk about it. But times have changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that silence of the past was maybe more detrimental, right? Than being able to speak about it. And let's be honest about that, right? Silence is not golden in all instances, right? And that now I think children and adults, right, have been in different spaces and in different educational situations, right, or social situations where conversation and discourse is important, right, to Inafat Malik. Inafat Malik isn't just about being harmonious, right, or to help each other, right? Inafat Malik also means being able to go through those struggles and in the end come to a solution, right, to help each other. And sometimes solutions are painful. And I think if we just understand that and accept that sometimes, at least for me, that it's okay, right? That it's okay for me to listen to my 11-year-old niece, right, who is upset at the fact of something maybe that she saw or something that happened in the family, right? Or maybe something that I said. And I think I need to be open to that. And so, yeah, times have changed. And I don't think it's necessarily changed for the worst in this regard, right? I think that communication is definitely key. I mean, this is what we're doing here today, is we're communicating with an audience, right? about our thoughts and our experiences and how we've seen kind of shifts, right, in our culture and in our practices. So thank you.
Yeah, so it kind of, that really leads very nice. Oh, Dr. Pat, did you want to say a little bit more? Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to, no, not at all. I just want to say that I don't see Nafamalik as being one event. I think it's a process. And no one should feel like we should not try to silence one another. It should be respectful. And, you know, when I'm thinking about children, family, it's much simpler. But when we're talking about public forums or having all kinds of discussions where there's obvious disagreements, how it is done is really important. One should always respect the other and their feelings and their emotions and not try to dismiss, well, why, I don't know why you're crying or why are you upset? Well, the person's upset for a good reason, I'm sure. But more than that is to, if one can just step back and just say, you know, I just need a moment, I'm just gonna go get some water, come back, and then say, we were just talking about, and then carrying on the discussions. Just even a few minutes of distance can calm somebody down enough to be able to collect their thoughts and articulate their concerns so that the other person can hear. If the other person doesn't want to hear again, is unwilling, unyielding, then again, time can be afforded. Let's talk about this when we're not so busy. How about next week? And that allows people to, you know, digest whatever it is that they're discussing versus trying to hammer it out all at one time, one experience, one event. It's a process, but it needs to be respectful. I don't know, does that help? So I always encourage people, you know, even if you just need to say, I just got to go to the bathroom real quick, I'll be back. But in that slow walk to the bathroom is really calming yourself down, saying, why was I so upset about that? And what can I say to help that person understand me? And what is it that I'm missing? You know, and by the time they get back, they're more able to listen and communicate more effectively. So.
All right, thank you. So we're getting a lot of questions about learning and where we learn and how we learn. So I'm going to try to combine a few. One says, it is amazing to learn about Chamorros reaching high levels in education and giving back. How are the barriers to higher education on Guam being dealt with? Are there still Government of Guam scholarships to UOG? Are there any private organizations offering scholarships for college? Building a large educated community would help with independence. And then someone else also says, where will the unlearning of individualism and other aspects of capitalism begin, and the relearning that the collective welfare is the aspect of our culture that has sustained people in this particular place in the world, and that even in the westernized atmosphere that our region increasingly becomes, it remains the most effective method for sustaining life in what others mistakenly proclaim as insular. And so I think at the heart of both questions is, one, there needs to be a space where this unlearning occurs and a relearning of who we are. But is there access to these institutions of higher learning where these conversations particularly take place? Someone else just very blatantly asked, how do we make higher education more available, accessible, and attainable? And so however you want to sort of tackle that.
Can I just jump in? In terms of like wanting to get your doctoral degree, it's an expensive pursuit. It could be very lengthy. There are many universities throughout the United States that if you put forward that you're a Pacific Islander, they will actually give you quite a handsome scholarship if you are competitive. But I also wanted to, so that's a solution, and I've encouraged a lot of people to do just that, is that we do have a highly educated population. we have a lot of people who have advanced degrees on Guam. And if we start to count the number of people, I think we would surprise ourselves, because there are actually a lot of people who are very bright here in Guam, and who have doctoral degrees, couple of doctoral degrees. They're just, they're out there. So I just want to answer that one piece, and maybe somebody else would like to take up another.
I think I would like to just emphasize, maybe for the adults, it's the unlearning, but for the children, it's the initial learning. And I think if we could focus on teaching the children the initial learning piece, then it will help the adults with the relearning or the unlearning. So I put that out there in terms of like what sorts of stereotypes we might be perpetuating with our children or grandchildren, right? So maybe we're more mindful of that. I also just wanted to share with regard to those posters that I was sharing earlier. They really do talk about like a different world view from a Micronesian perspective, and looking at the dynamics within the family context, the extended family context and community. If any of you are interested out there in getting copies of the posters, if you could just let somebody from the group know, and I could make them available to you. We don't have a lot of copies, but we have some of the copies. And then, other things, other examples, right? Like people are writing local storybooks, right? Some in Chamorro about for children, right? So we're starting at the very beginning of these notions of self. And if we can keep doing that, right? Writing stories about our legends or our family context or our environment or the foods that we eat and the foods that come from our environment. I think that would just really help the next generation. And, then also to share, the particular text on the behavioral health concepts. I mean, this is available through the University of Guam Cedars. If you're interested, you could contact them directly to see, and some of the healing practices, right? Like the power from within and the power from our natural resources in the healing process. I mean, that's a different worldview from mainstream society. Dr. Pat was also instrumental in producing this particular text. So these are texts that are rich in cultural knowledge, right? That are available to the community if you just ask, right? So so that would be my piece. I just wanted to kind of share that and hope that it helps.
I'm going to add a bit. I'm from the university, so I just want to add, in terms of making educational opportunities accessible, the university is probably the least costly university, right? With regard to tuition rates. But I think was a really good thing that most people, or that a lot of people don't know, is that we have a lot of young Chamorros who return to the island after getting their advanced degrees and are now in the classrooms and in research centers across the university, whether it's in marine biology, whether it's in health sciences, in education, in the liberal arts and humanities. We have them. We're here, we're there. And I think that's really kind of changed and shifted the landscape of the university of what it was 20 or 30 years ago, is that we have Chamorros who have returned. And there are lots of scholarships available, like Dr. Pat said, right? I believe it's just under 50% of our student population that receives federal financial aid. And then there are lots and lots of private scholarships from individuals and businesses across the island who are investing in the education of people from Guam. And I think that's really key here to know, is that there are businesses, right? And there are entrepreneurs who see the value of educating our local population, and that we don't always have to hire outside, right? To bring in, that we can build up from within. And we have the capacity to do that. And so I just wanted to share that you know, the university is a very different place, and I'm very happy to work with other Chamorros as administrators and as faculty members, as well as, you know, a strong support staff. So yeah, Viva UOG.
Viva UOG.
Viva.
I know,
you.
the alma maters, right? Well, there's
Yeah.
also this idea of exchange students. If a student had in mind and there's a process, of course, where after so many semesters, you could apply to become an exchange student, and you attend a university somewhere else that accepts you, and there's an exchange of students, and then you pay Guam tuition, not non-resident tuition elsewhere. So it's something to explore, you know. So, you know, Lola, you were talking about the question about capitalism, which is very an important concept. But I really like to introduce the idea of moral development, that Guam really needs to look at moral development. There's Kohlberg's stages of moral development, but there's also Carol Gilligan's model of moral development, and it's how we treat each other, how we can move towards being a community of caring, where we take care of one another, you know. And really going back, I just had this flash of thought that Chamorros are Micronesians, and anybody who disagrees with that needs to just breathe and one day get to accept that we are Micronesians, and we need to also accept. So and I was just thinking, because of Carol Gilligan, we need to embrace that concept, because once we do, then we bring everyone up with us, rather than seeing us against them, or that they're new, or we need to see them as an us, and then we all grow. So again, it's Kohlberg and Carol Gilligan's moral development model really is something to think about. Capitalism, you know, I don't think we're very good at that. I'm sorry, because we're, you know, if I was going to go have a business where I'm selling products, man, I'd be giving it away. You know? The coffers would be empty, because I'd be like, they cannot afford it. Here, take it. You know, because that's part of our how we're built. We're built to take care versus make money. You know, it's a whole different paradigm and thinking. So anyway, I just thought I'd bring those concepts out for others to really look at and what it means. So Kohlberg at the highest level is like Gandhi, Jesus, Martin Luther King Jr., where, you know, you think about others. And then Carol Gilligan the same. So anyway, enough about the academics.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pat, because actually someone was asking that they're feeling a bit anxious about the presidential election, and they're actually wondering, you know, they're a bit conflicted about it because they're not as worried about the local election. So that kind of goes back to our ideas of, you know, what is it we're concerned about, and why is it we're concerned about something else kind of outside of us? And their main question is, why am I getting anxious about this when it's something that I can't really participate in? And they're asking if this anxiety is a product of colonization.
Oh, yes, it's, may I jump in? Anybody want to jump in on this one? You know, we should all be anxious, frankly, because we've had 3.5 years of one type of a leader who does not respect people of color, who has views about immigrants, who has all kinds of views about women and money. And one of the reasons why it's so frightening is because it goes against everything that that most Chamorros are. Some Chamorros don't, like, you know, being aware that you're a person of color. Well, I'm very aware I'm a person of color, and that was a painful lesson. But feeling anxious is a very reasonable response to a very unreasonable time. COVID is one thing. The last 3.5 years have been personally horrific. I just can't, I have a difficult time with anticipating another 4 more years of this. So the response is normal. The response is very reasonable given if you are self-aware. If you're not self-aware, then chances are is that it's fine. Maybe you will even, if you could vote, you would vote for him. But not having the vote doesn't really change anything. You in your hearts know what you want, who you would vote for. It would be difficult to have our actual votes actually count towards anything if the Electoral College is really what defines who wins. So try not to allow your anxiety get away with you. All the more reason to really dig deep on the issues of decolonization when we have absolutely zero power over what happens to us tomorrow, next year. Then we may want to rethink and really look at what is it that I need to do so that I feel I have some power. I don't know if that was helpful. It's a very normal response.
I think on a larger scale, you know, we're looking at not just the election, but what's going on globally with regard to the pandemic, and that even just that alone creates a lot of anxiety. You know, I think earlier we're pretty much in unison, the three of us, when we talk about being kind to yourself, right? And nurturing the self so that you could be there for others, because that's consistent with our worldview. Those are things that we have control over. Things that we have no control over, we surrender at that point until we're in a better place to regroup and then move forward. So some of it is also strategizing, right? And working smarter, not necessarily harder. So, you know, whether it's part of this whole, you know, colonization or colonialism, I guess in part it could be, but I don't think that that should overshadow the fact that the world is going through this together. And that's something that unifies us instead of like looking at it as something that divides us.
So we have gone slightly over time and the questions are continuously pouring in. So I do apologize if we weren't able to answer any of your questions today. What I will attempt to do is I've gathered some of the ones that came in that we weren't able to get to. And I wanted to just kind of share them in combination for our three panelists to maybe think about in their closing remarks. And so the three topics that, you know, came up that we weren't able to directly address in the Q&A. The first one was really, how do we address this trauma? The questions were, how might we modify our mental health practices and models on island to address ongoing trauma? But also, how do we foster collective healing when the trauma continues because we are still colonized? And also, how do we reach individuals in the community that are not in this conversation, but living in the margins every day, experiencing this trauma? So around the issue of trauma, what can we do to change the way that we respond and to heal when we still remain colonized. The second one was about food, that food is healing in a spiritual and cultural sense, but a lot of our food is hurting us health-wise. How can I get my tata to put down the spam? This person asked. And then finally, how do I persuade my family to learn the Chamorro language with me? This person says it's hard when no one else will speak it with them. And another person chimed in that she wanted to teach her godson the language, but he just wants to watch things on YouTube on his tablet. And there really isn't anything in our language that is interesting for him. So, you know, I know that they're in three different angles, but I think they connect in a sense that while we remain colonized, sort of these methods to address our trauma and these ways that we need to heal would involve, a relearning of our language, use of our language, and also use of our traditional foods, right, in the process. And so I thought those were all really great questions. And so as you conclude, as each one of our panelists conclude, if you want to address any of them, or just anything else that you feel you'd like to say to end the evening.
I'll start. Can I start?
Okay.
Can I start the ending?
Yeah.
You know, everything, the three topics you talked about, trauma, food, and language. For me, it comes down to communication, right? And our ability to communicate with each other and how we do that while maintaining respect, of course, for our elderly and each other. Now, I can't speak too much to trauma. All I know is that when I know that someone is suffering or someone has been through a hard time, I lend myself, right? I give of myself, the time and the energy, right, to help that person heal. And that's the best I know how to do. That's how my grandmother taught me, right? When someone was hurting, that you be there for them. But that's one thing. And maybe that's too general. How we can do that, I think individuals can decide in different ways, how they can be helpful to someone who is in pain. Now food, right? Spam isn't necessarily Chamorro, right? But it's a comfort food, right? Spam is a comfort food because we relate it to growing up when they cooked breakfast on the weekends. That's what we ate on the weekends on Saturday morning. But also maybe kind of talking about how to make substitutions, right? Again, I'm not a dietitian, right? But I do try, particularly with family members who have gout, right? And they can't have the lectin and they can't have the spam very often. But I think communicating that, and sometimes we just have to make compromises with our health, right? Not to be less healthy, but to be healthier. I'm not gonna have spam 3 times a week. I'm only gonna have it once. And it's okay to say that. I think it's okay to say that, sorry, switch the vegetable oil for olive oil or something, right? But again, it's all about communication. Same with the language, right? Only I want to learn it, someone else doesn't want to learn it with me. I think the happy medium is how are we going to make it relevant, right? How is the person going to make it relevant in their life and for it to be meaningful? Because again, if we're only using language to scold or to say bad words, right, then the little kids are not going to want to learn it. And so, right, we need to make it meaningful in everyday conversation, right? Even if it's just a response, a day, right? I mean, kind of little things like that. Including them in instances where you do use the language. I know in my family, right, particularly when someone passes away, the children are all involved in that process, right? In the setting up for the Lasadu, in praying the Lasadu, in singing all the songs for the Lasadu. And I think that by including them in this and not excluding, it'll make it more meaningful for them. And that's my spiel. And thank you for having me this afternoon.
Yeah. I think I just wanted to touch on the trauma piece, and we can't change our history, but we can definitely impact our future. And I really see that working within the family context is a way to make that happen. I feel like working with the next generation is helping to set and build on that foundation. And whatever wounds the adults may have had experienced in their lives, just to be kind to yourself, forgive, so that you can let go of that poison so that it doesn't continue to weigh you down, and to love your children and your grandchildren and anyone else in your family that happens to share your home, to love them, so that in that practice of love, they can in turn love themselves and others. So again, we can't change our history, but we can definitely impact our future. And that's really all I wanted to share at the end here.
I was thinking, that was really great, both of you. I was really thinking about how trauma work was really more effective when working with the prison population. And part of it is that, they have no competing struggles. They just have to make it through the day. They think 24 hours a day. And so asking them about their trauma history and recognizing that they can change. They can make the change for the next generation, that they don't have to follow the pain and the suffering and the maladaptive experiences that were adaptive at one time in their life and in their future. So healing, I found that was very helpful with that population. But healing as a community from trauma involves the work that you're doing today. These forums that keep people talking, listening, learning, the music, being able to, I think I was listening to in Guåhan discussions around, I think it was yesterday. But forums such as this, really supporting the celebration of our music, the dances, even though we're like, oh, where did that come from? But it's okay, because we're all in the process of growing and transition. And so when I think about the food, I'm also having to be very mindful. It's like that spam roll, the food really looks good, but I have to maybe substitute. So I'm going through that right now. But there's hagansuni, there's lemai, guihan, there's all kinds of very culturally acceptable and tasty food choices. It just means that someone might have to go buy fish or some other substitute. There was this one, maybe you would know this person, but his dissertation was about learning Chamorro through song. Who was that? Do you know who that is? But he was, but he was learning, and he had published his dissertation on Guam about learning Chamorro through music, through the songs, the words, and understanding what the words meant. It was very powerful for him. And I think if someone really wants to learn, I grew up, I was definitely Chamorro Po'asu, but, because I was at that stage where we didn't, our, teachers and everybody said, no, you can't speak Chamorro. And so by the time it came to my generation, I heard it all the time, so I have the knowledge in my head. But then when I started to speak it, it was because I had friends who just said, never mind, just say it, even if it's wrong, we'll correct you. And there was the laughing, yes, because some of it was pretty bad. Lopago, and so if I can reclaim it, someone who has the will and wherewithal can do it. Another idea is putting in doing more shows, maybe some, movies or things like that in the Chamorro language. So there's all kinds of ideas, but we're not in a bad place. We just have to give ourselves permission to move forward. We don't need permission from anybody for any of the things we've talked about. You're never going to sit and wait for somebody to give us permission. You know, you need to just say, this looks like a great idea. We should do it. And we should do it and do it with passion and love. Why? Because why not? We have the power. We already do. And we have the voice. We need to use it. And we need to celebrate and learn, especially from those who are getting older and who will pass, because they have so many lessons. Our elders need to be respected and loved and cared for. And sometimes, you know, they come in and out, but listen when they're clear and they're thinking and they're sharing. So anyway, this was an incredible experience. I appreciate it. I appreciate being a part of this wonderful panel. Just really treasured the messages you've shared, and I'm just full of gratitude. Thank you.
Viva, Sizos and Sainamaasi Lokwi. I think I'll leave us on that question. Why not? We have the power. We need to use our voice. And so I hope that we will continue to use our voice to remind us of who we are as a people, to remember the value of our elders and our community, the importance of our culture in our decisions that we make, and the possibilities of a future where we can continue to do things without having to ask anyone for permission. So Sizos Maasi, Saina Maasi for tuning in. As I mentioned, our next General Assembly will be on December 3rd, but please listen to Hit Radio 100 for the next couple Saturdays at 4 p.m. for more of an independence conversation. Adios.
Wonderful. Adios.
Thank you. You guys are wonderful.